Hey guys, my name is Ivan from Indoor Ivan. Happy New Year! It is now 2020. It's been a while since I last posted any videos to my channel. For those of you who have subscribed, thank you. And for those of you who haven't, please think about subscribing below. I'm also on Instagram at Indoor Ivan. I do a lot of things with houseplants. I've been slowly venturing off to do some outdoor stuff, but most of my plants that I do take care of and talk about are indoor tropical plants. 2020 marks a new year of different adventures, so I'm really happy and excited to continue on with this plant journey. The past few months have been a little bit busy. I was finishing up my seasonal job at our local greenhouse that we have nearby, and then also starting a new job. I was very fortunate to be invited also to do a plant talk at a local garden club, and then also attend one myself recently as an audience member. Going back to plants, this video will be dedicated towards how to take care of your indoor houseplants over the winter. Winter does present a lot of challenges with temperature, lighting, and then also the low humidity in your house. And I do get a lot of questions on what you should be doing after you bring your plants in over the summer, or if you bought a plant recently, the best way to keep it alive. A lot of the points that I'm going to bring up were in my original presentation that I did at the garden club. My talk was over an hour long, so I'm going to try to make this video a little shorter, and then maybe possibly also into 2 parts, so that way it's not too much to take in all at once. So before I talk about how to take care of your houseplants over the winter, you do need to keep in mind that not all of your houseplants will go dormant. I feel like it's almost a misconception that it's winter, all plants go dormant, and that's not necessarily true. And it really depends on lighting and temperature. In most cases, you can keep your plants growing. However, there are winter growers and summer growers, so certain plants such as your aloes tend to go dormant in the summer, and also your snake plants as well. They will grow a little bit more over the winter, and you can think of them as your winter growers. There are other plants such as your ficus and your plumeria that will grow over the summer, but then once it's winter, will go dormant. Depending on your kind of condition or your grow setup, you can keep certain plants growing over the winter, but again, it will depend, and it's something that you do have to pay attention to. So if your plants are growing, you do have to treat them a little bit different than if they are actually dormant. All right, so let's begin. I like to think about care for plants based off of kind of 5, maybe 6 different things. So some things that you do need to keep in mind is your climate in your house, the lighting that you get, water, the type of soil, fertilizer that you might be giving your plants, and then also pest management. Pest management can be a little bit tricky and probably the most challenging of all aspects to master. So when you think about climate in your house, there are 2 main things that you need to keep in mind: temperature and humidity. So when you think about temperature, for most indoor houseplants, you can get away with room temperature. So somewhere in the low 20s will do. My thermostat in my house is set at 21, and most of my plants are doing well. Unfortunately, the plants that I stuck in the basement, it does get a little bit chilly down there, so the plants are struggling a bit because it's kind of in the mid-teens down there. I don't really heat the basement as much, so it's a little bit colder. When you do put your plants in and around your house, do keep in mind that you don't want to be putting them in the way of any drafts. So these drafts could be windows. Any cold air can provide or cause shock to your plants. And then not just cold air, but you can think about hot air as a stressor as well. So anything from a portable heater that you decided to plug in over the winter, or those heating vents that are in the ceiling or on the floor, do add that extra stress on the plant. So try to keep your plants away from those because they're not great. Certain plants are able to manage with the stress a little better than others. So it's kind of up to you to figure out what plants go where. I do have some plants that I actually put really close to a vent, and it's more just to cover it up. But I usually try to find plants that have thicker and waxier leaves that aren't as prone to leaf loss and fluctuations in temperature or humidity. Now, in regard to humidity, ideally you would want to keep your humidity somewhere within the range of like 40 to 60% if possible. Humidity levels do go down over the winter because of heating. It does take a lot of moisture out of the air, which makes it a lot harder on your plants. So there are some things that you can do to increase humidity. You can do a pebble tray, you can mist your plants, you could buy a humidifier if you want to. I know there's a lot of people who buy humidifiers for their plants. I used to do that, but then I found that I was constantly wiping off condensation near the window because it was so humid. So you do have to be careful. If you live in a house in particular with a lot of wood in the walls, extra caution, because if you have too much humidity, that does promote a lot of mold growth. So it's that delicate balance of taking care of your plants and then also taking care of your house and yourself as well. So I would stick somewhere in like the 50s, because you don't want to go too high, because then you're dealing with mold, you're dealing with a lot of excess condensation, which can cause problems with your house. Another thing that you can also do is just group your plants together. Plants that are grouped together will kind of trap a lot of humidity as the soil evaporates. I tend to do that with mine. I've kind of given up on things such as pebble trays and humidifiers because it's a lot of work. So you'll notice that with my plant collection, for the most part, they are plants that don't require a lot of humidity, and if they do, I might group them together or put them in like a little aquarium, so that way the humidity is trapped a little bit better. Over the years, I found that I've kind of become more of a low maintenance and slightly lazy gardener. So I don't have a lot of high maintenance plants in my collection, just for the reason that I don't have a lot of time. I have a lot of plants and I don't have that much time to take care of each one. So if you survive in my house, it's great, you can stay. And if you're struggling, usually I'll probably give you away or try to keep you alive, and then you end up dying. So on to the second aspect, lighting. Light over the summer is a lot more intense than during the winter. So if you have plants that are near your window over the summer and it was great, over the winter it might not be so great. So you do have to keep that in mind. So if you think about lighting, there are areas in your home or directional areas in your home that have better lighting than others. You can think of your south-facing window as the best possible scenario for your plants. A lot of people, if you watch any YouTube videos or follow people on Instagram, your south-facing window is the prime real estate for all of your plants. It is the sunniest place you can find. So if you have that lovely south-facing window, which I no longer do, use it because it is good. Second, in terms of intensity and quality of light, I would say that your west-facing windows are probably your next best choice in terms of quality sunlight. You do get that more intense afternoon sun, which is great for any of your full sun plants that you might have. In number 3, in terms of a place to put your plant, your east-facing windows. So your west-facing and east-facing windows get almost the same amount of light, but the intensity is a little bit different because your east-facing windows get more of your more gentle morning sun compared to your west-facing windows, which get the afternoon sun. Your least ideal place to put plants, with the only other direction left, is your north-facing windows. Your north-facing windows don't get a whole lot of light, which can make it challenging. So if you have lots of windows, try to avoid your north-facing windows. If that's your only set of windows, you can make it work. It is just a little bit harder. All right, so over the winter there are 4 things that you can do to ensure that your plants are getting a little bit more light than they would be in their current location. 1, you can think about washing your leaves. You can use a cloth. I tend to put my plants under the shower. It helps to get rid of a lot of dust that might be accumulating. So if you have a layer of dust, your plants obviously aren't photosynthesizing as well as they could be. So clean your leaves. A second option that you can do if you are able to do so is clean your windows. Same thing with your plants being dusty and not being able to get as much light. If your windows are dirty, it's that extra layer of dirt that is stopping that light from coming in to your house and helping your plants grow. So if you're able to clean your windows, remove that layer of dirt and dust, you'll get more sun coming in, which is great. Another option, if you are able to, is move your plants closer to the window. It's hard to do if you're in a north-facing window. I'll use a south-facing window as an example because they're great. You can think about your south-facing window. All of your full sun plants go right near the window. And then you can kind of stagger your plants further away from the window depending on how much light they need. So obviously your low light plants will be further away from the window because they don't need as much intense light. As winter approaches, you'll want to move your plants closer because the intensity of the light does go down. So if you think about your east-facing window over the winter, it might seem more like a north-facing window over the summer. So everything kind of just bumps down in terms of intensity. So your south-facing window over the winter might have the same intensity as a west-facing window over the summer, if that helps in any way to kind of help you picture how the intensity works. Your other option is to go out and buy some grow lights. I have quite a few grow lights helping my plants survive because since we moved to our current home, I don't have the luxury of having south-facing windows. If you look behind me, this is actually a west-facing window, and there's also an overhang, which makes it really hard for light to come in. So a lot of plants that I have on the first floor are low-light plants, and then upstairs, unfortunately, I have only a north-facing and a west-facing window for my plants, but I add grow lights just to make sure that they are able to get more light, because in my old place, all my plants were right by my south-facing window. They don't have the luxury of that now. If you're looking at getting grow lights, there are usually 2 options that you can choose from. You can choose from LED lights, and then you can also choose from fluorescent lights. If you are looking at LED lights, the cheapest ones that you can find, like on Amazon, are usually your blue and red spectrum lights, which kind of glow purple. There is a reason why they are oddly colored and hurt your eyes. The blue lights help with photosynthesis, and then your red lights help with flowering, and then also budding. So those are the 2 most important spectrums of light for your plants. So that's why they glow purple. Your other option is to look at full spectrum lights. In my plant collection, I have Sunblasters, which are full spectrum, so they are white. They're much easier on the eyes. but they also cost a little bit more. They have a full spectrum, which means that you're getting your red and your blue, but you're also getting other spectrums of light, which kind of mimic sunlight, which is great for your plants. If you're looking at the two different lights, there are some different characteristics with them. Your LED lights don't emit as much heat, so you're able to put them a lot closer to your plants, whereas with your fluorescent lights, they do generate more heat and aren't as energy efficient. So you do need to leave a little bit more space between the light and your plant. Do keep in mind that light intensity decreases with distance. So when you're setting up your grow lights, you'll want to make sure that they aren't too far away from your plants, because as you move it further and further away, you're actually not providing as much light as you think you are. Our artificial lights are nowhere as intense as the sun, so I try to keep my light as close to the plants as possible. Sometimes it is challenging to do so, but if you're able to group plants by height, try to keep as small of a gap as possible for your plants. Also on the topic of light, usually when people come in, or not usually, sometimes, when people come into the greenhouse and they ask for a certain plant, they're not really thinking about the characteristics of the plant itself. They want to just look for a plant that does well in their space, but not really thinking about how to take care of the plant. So somebody might want to come in, they love the leaf shape of a certain plant, and they have no idea what light conditions are in their house. And usually when you end up thinking that way, your plants do end up struggling. So when you buy your plants, think about your space. The plants need to thrive and grow in a certain spot. So if you have a dark corner, don't get a plant that requires a lot of sun. It's not going to do well. And that's something that when people come into greenhouses or into stores, they find a plant that looks pretty and they're just going to plop it anywhere they want. It doesn't work that way. And before I forget and move on to water, with your grow lights, a lot of people will ask, how long should I leave them on? Am I supplementing the light? Am I gonna, they're kind of confused as to what to do. I try to leave my lights on for as long as I can. So I would say, plants need minimum 6 hours of light. So if you're in a dark area and you have a grow light, no less than 6 hours. Ideally, you're kind of aiming for around 10 to 16 hours of light. I try to aim for the upper end. So what I do with my grow lights is I kind of fill in the gaps where the sun isn't out. So over the winter, I'm going to have my grow lights go on really early in the morning when the sun isn't out. And then after, when the sun comes out, my grow lights, sometimes I'll have them go off just to save some energy. Some people let them stay on just to ensure that the plants are getting quality light. Again, up to you. And then my grow lights will usually kick in towards the end of the day when the sun is setting, just to make sure that my plants are getting as much sun as possible. I try to always give at least 8 hours for my plants just to have some darkness. Another aspect that you need to think about as you're taking care of your houseplants over the winter is watering. Watering is quite tricky because there's so many aspects that you need to think about. Some things that you can think about is your plant root bound. If your plant is root bound, it probably will need to be watered a little bit more than a plant that isn't root bound. You have to think about how much sun your plant is getting, because the sun is going to evaporate some of that water in the soil. So if your plant is in a sunny spot, you might water it more than a plant that's in a dark area where there's not a lot of evaporation. You have to think about things like air circulation and humidity, because if it's a windy spot, your soil might dry out a little bit faster than if the air is stagnant. And if it's a humid area, it might be a little bit harder for that soil moisture to evaporate into the air. Even your soil media can play a role. So when people ask me, how often do I need to water? There are lots of things, because in my soil, I tend to add perlite to my soil to allow a lot more drainage. So I will water a little bit more than the average person, just because my soil I make well draining, just to make sure that I'm not overwatering my plants. And also, if you think about your type of pot, the type of pot plays a huge role in how much you're watering. If you have a plant that is in a plastic pot, it's going to hold on to water a little bit more than if you have a clay pot, where moisture might be wicked out into the clay because it's so porous. So watering can be quite tricky, and there are a lot of things that you need to think about. But as a general rule, over the winter, you need a lot less water for your plants. The reason being is that a lot of your plants aren't growing as quickly, so water less. With my plants, I find that over the winter, I might be watering depending on the plant, every week to every 2 to 3 weeks. Compared to in the summer, I might be watering twice a week and every week, depending on the plant. So a general tip that I like to tell people when they have plants, make sure your pots have drainage holes. Watering your plants when they have drainage holes is so much easier than if they don't. So if you have a plant and you want to put it in a nice little lovely pot, think about just plopping your plant in. Don't plant it actually into this pot that has no drainage. Keep it in some sort of nursery or a cheaper plastic pot. It makes it a lot easier. You can lift the pot out, water it, and plunk it back in. Without drainage holes, it's a lot harder to gauge how much water is being used by your plant, and you might end up rotting your plants by accident. So I do recommend for your plants, use a decorative pot, but don't plant your plants actually into the pot. Just use some sort of cash po instead. With watering, my advice always is it's better to underwater your plants than to overwater. When you underwater your plants go through a little bit of stress because they're thirsty, but it's nothing that's going to kill them for the most part, unless you get ferns. If you overwater your plants, it's a lot harder to rescue your plants, because once plants start rotting, it's almost an uphill battle to save them. So when you do see your plant and you're kind of curious, does my plant need water? There are some things that you can think about. So if I take my pilea, I can look at the leaves. If they are drooping quite a bit, it probably needs water. My peace lilies are quite dramatic. When they need water, they will go very limp. So that's my sign. I need to give you water. Another thing is you can feel your pots. I tell people when they buy their plants, water them and feel how heavy it is. That is the weight of a well-watered plant. And then just every now and then over the week, lift and feel the pot, as it will get lighter. As you notice your plants and your leaves starting to wilt, feel how heavy that pot is, because it is going to be light. And in your mind, you can make mental notes of, oh, my plastic pot is feeling lighter. It's probably time to give it water. You probably don't want to have your plant completely wilted when you water it, but it is a good indicator. I constantly lift up my pots just to feel how light they are. A little bit trickier with clay pots. So usually with clay pots, I don't put a lot of plants in there that need constant watering. So I'll put succulents in my clay pots because you don't need to water them as much and you don't have to monitor them as often as other plants do. If you are stuck, maybe like if somebody gifted you a plant and it's in a decorative pot and you have no idea when it needs water because, I just told you lift your pot, feel how heavy it is, and with the decorative pot, it's quite heavy already. You can always invest in a water meter. So a water meter, you can just stick right into the soil, and usually there's instructions to tell you how to use it and when a plant needs water. So the one that I have, you can stick it in, it'll kind of give you a rating in terms of how much moisture is in there. You can then take a look at what type of plant you have, and then whether or not it is time to water the plant. Very helpful. I don't tend to use a moisture meter because I feel bad when I have to stab the root ball of my plant over and over. So over time, you do kind of get used to kind of figuring out when plants need watering. Just a little bit of practice. So finally, when you're watering your plants, you need to think about how you're watering your plants. I actually had a little conversation with another plant parent about this, and we kind of disagreed a little bit as to how to water your plant and which way is best. I tend to water plants all sorts of ways compared to the person that I talk to that tends to stick to one way. Do what's best for you. I'll explain to you what I do with my plants and the reasoning behind it. If you find that it doesn't work for you, just stick to what works. Because if your plants are alive and thriving, you're doing something right. So I usually water in, I would say, 3 different ways. So the first way I water is I just go around with a little bottle and I pour water on my plants on the top of the soil, and then I just let it soak through. The reason why I do this is these are for big plants. They're for plants that I can't lift. They are for plants that are in a decorative pot. So I just pour some water in and they are happy. Great. The other method that I use is I'll go to the sink and I'll water my plants there. I'll let water run through the soil and leach out. I'll give it a little bit of a break, and then I'll wash it and water it again. 2 reasons why I do this. It's easier because I don't have to worry about water dripping everywhere, and I make sure that my plants get enough water. But the other reason is I like to do this to get rid of a lot of salt in the fertilizer. So it's a great way to wash all those fertilizer salts that are accumulating in the soil. But unfortunately, at the same time, you are washing away a lot of the nutrients that might be good for the plant. So something to keep in mind as you do that. The other way that you can water your plants is bottom up. I don't do this as often for the main reason that it just takes so much time. If you water bottom up, you can let your plants sit in some water. Water is going to be soaked up through the soil and your plants are going to be well watered. I don't tend to do this. I will do this for certain plants. I will do this for plants that are in peat-based soil. I will do this for plants that are in like an orchid bark if I have the time. With peat-based soil, what happens is if you don't keep that soil moist, it will kind of clump together and it's almost impermeable to water. So as much as you pour water on top, that peat-based soil or that root ball isn't going to absorb any water. So I like to sit those plants in water. Over time, that soil will rehydrate and it won't be a big ball of floating peat. With orchids, most of my orchids are either in sphagnum moss or in bark. The reason why you'd want to soak these is because naturally bark doesn't absorb as much water. Moss, when it's dry, has a hard time absorbing water. So when you let those plants, or those 2 mediums, sit in water, they have the chance to absorb enough water to allow your plants to hopefully last about a week before you need to water them again. Alright, so I think I spoke for long enough. If you take a look behind me, it's now really dark, so I've been talking for a while. So I hope you managed to learn something about taking care of houseplants. I'll work on getting the second part of this video set up, so we'll talk more about fertilizers, the types of soils that you can use for your plants, and then also pest management. So for now, keep growing, and I'll see you next time.